We're back with another Monday preview. We've got Sarina here from Cats and Bolts podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so glad you asked.
All right, let's get into it. For our listeners, we all kind of know that I like talking about the Florida Panthers, and I'm very excited for this game. But Sarina, for folks who maybe haven't listened to our show and haven't listened to me explain my love for the Florida Panthers, who would you say are kind of just like the key pieces with your current roster right now that people who aren't familiar with the Panthers should be very much aware of?
I think that Sam Reinhart is probably the name that pops out the most. I know most people realized how good of a hockey player he is last year, getting more than 50 goals. But Paul Maurice kind of juggled the lines around quite a bit near the end of the year, which is exactly what needed to happen. But now he's got Reinhart playing with Barkov a lot, and Barkov is such a great playmaker that Reinhart's already off to a great start this year. And Reinhart is he's got hockey intuition. He's just a good hockey player. Now, as far as the rest of the team, there's a couple guys that kind of come to mind, like Rodriguez. He's that guy that all of a sudden he plays on the top line, and he never really made any mistakes last year. But the Panthers had so much movement from last year to this year, well, especially on defense, which is another whole nother subject there. But it kind of allowed guys like Rodriguez to play up, and maybe it makes Verhaeghe's a little bit more versatile. And Verhaeghe's probably that one player that I think most people don't realize how good he actually is. You know, growing up in Saskatchewan, admittedly, we just didn't watch the Panthers. I don't think anybody really outside of Florida really does. It's not the team everybody watches. Right. Now, when we were growing up, now I think they do a little bit more. But the first time I saw Carter Verhaeghe play live, I was extremely impressed. And he's been my favorite Panther ever since. And he just continues to impress everybody because he wasn't that big junior star coming out of Canada that everybody expected. And he's really got a pivotal role with the Panthers, and he's really good on their power play as well.
Excellent. Speaking of kind of the movement that you guys had during the off season, were there any guys that you were surprised about that kind of left during the off season? Some maybe you wish would have stayed, maybe made some other changes?
I think probably, I don't know if anybody was surprised that Tarasenko ended up leaving. Mm-hmm. I think everybody knew they were just going to kind of pick him up for that. Oliver Ekman-Larsson was a big shock, I think, to a lot of people. He's played here for a while, and he's been a popular player. He's played really well, just always has a pretty decent game. And so I think it was a little shocking when he left. You know, they lost a lot of defensemen over the past few years. They've lost guys like Gudis, and there's just a bunch that I can't think of off the top of my head right now. But I would say Ekman-Larsson is probably the biggest shock. Now, has it affected them? I don't think so. You know, they seem to be doing all right, but that was probably the biggest one.
Gotcha. And then are there any guys kind of in the pipeline, maybe like younger guys who this is their first year having more time on the NHL scope, or guys in the Florida pipeline that you're excited to see?
To be totally honest, there's no actual names that jump out that I'm like, this is going to be the next guy. Mm-hmm. And here's why I say that. I don't think the Panthers are really looking for that right now.
Right.
They're a team that is up here. Yeah. So they're not ready to not repeat. They're going all in. And we saw some guys in the preseason, I think, that had more of a chance than not, but I don't think there was really any threat that any of them were going to be, you know, the next Bedard or the next, you know, whoever, right. Tage Thompson kind of thing. They just don't have a lot of those younger guys coming up because that's not where they're at right now.
Right. You spoke of that they're ready to do a repeat. They're ready to run it back. What do you think they need to do? Or do they kind of just need to continue at the pace that they're going at right now? Do you think they need to make changes to their game to kind of run it back again?
I don't think so at all. I think that I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not a Panthers fan. I'm an Oilers fan, and I had to physically be in the rink for Game 7 last year, and I highly do not recommend that to anyone, FYI. But
Oh,
The thing with the pay was it was awful. It'll be awful for a while, I think.
yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, it was probably the worst thing I've ever experienced in my entire life. I'm not kidding. It was terrible. But I'll say this about the Panthers. They're not a dynamic team.
Mhm,
You're not going to sit there and I don't know if you watch Edmonton a lot, but if you watch Draisaitl and McDavid, it's just bing, 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 bing.
right.
They're so good. And the Panthers, that's not how they play. They just get the job done. And everybody in the playoffs last year was like, oh, Florida's defense is going to kill Edmonton. I'm like, I don't think that's the case. I don't think you can stop a Connor McDavid. And, we saw the two completely different Panthers in the finals last year.
Mhm,
And a lot of Panthers fans said to me, you're right, Edmonton should have won that series. The Panthers had no heart. They were just whatever, but they still got the job done because Paul Maurice made sure. There was a period where they lost like 5 or 6 games in a row in like the last kind of quarter of the season last year. And Paul Maurice was like, everybody relax. I've got this under control. And he wasn't stressed out, and I'm not surprised. And he took that time to figure out what was working, move some guys around, and they just play their game. There's so many games that they win, and I've said this for probably 3 years, that they have no business of winning. They
right.
get all played and they turn around and win, and all of a sudden it goes off somebody and into the net. But that's what works. Doesn't matter. They still get the job done.
Yeah, I think speaking of Paul Maurice, definitely a fan of him. Just seems like a fun personality of a head coach. I remember being down there with crusty old guy, my dad, for when the Blackhawks were playing Florida and then Tampa. This was the season that Florida met Vegas in the finals. And it was about March or so. And I think the Blackhawks were up by two. Florida ended up winning it
Yeah.
because that's where we were at the point in time. But the entire barn was chanting for Fire Maurice. And then they go to the finals, and everybody's kind of just having this love for him. So it was definitely interesting. I'm like, oh, we like him now.
I'll say this as diplomatically as possible, but if you want me to really let her fly, I will. You and I grew up in a hockey place.
Hmm.
These people did not.
Yeah.
So the mentality, most people don't come out of the womb a Panthers fan
Right.
like you did a Blackhawks fan and I did an Oilers fan. I don't remember not being an Oilers fan. But here it's a completely different mentality. You don't really have a strong alumni. They've had a team for this is their 31st season. It's not like they're brand new, but they act like they are. And they
Right.
have a lot of new fans. Up until 3 years ago, they weren't filling the rink, and even still they don't fill the rink. And it's just they have a different mentality because they want to win. South Florida sports fans are interesting. They're just not really diehard on any of their teams unless
Mhm.
they're winning. So the Panthers are probably number 4 on the depth chart of popularity in South Florida as far as major sports teams are concerned, maybe. But more people watch college football here, that they have more loyalties to college football. But it's a different mentality. It's like very Johnny on the spot with what they want.
Mhm.
And the had the Panthers lost, I don't know what they would have like. I'm not. They probably would have gotten over it a lot quicker. But yes, they probably would have called for Paul Maurice's head for sure.
Right. Um, Speaking of kind of the fans down in Florida, I know, or at least from what I heard from Canadian folks during the finals, it was kind of split. There were a lot of people being like, "Yes, we're going to cheer for Edmonton because this is the Canadian team that's in the finals." And then there were some Flames fans or some Habs fans that I knew that were like, "Absolutely not. That's not my city. My city got knocked out in April. I'm not cheering for Edmonton." Were Florida fans kind of backing the Panthers in the finals, or or is it kind of like the Lightning got knocked out? I'm not going to switch allegiances to a different team.
That is a great question. I honestly don't think they were, but
Hmm.
I don't think they're quite as.
Dedicated.
That's a good word. I was going to, but I just don't think that they really care that much.
Hmm.
And like I said, nobody really, there's not Panthers fans outside of South Florida. It's not like you're going to find Blackhawks fans around because there's transplants. And in Canada, most of the old timers are Leafs fans or Habs fans or whatever they are.
I remember being up in Edmonton in January, and we saw like other Blackhawk fans. I think I was one of the only nut jobs that flew up to Edmonton in the middle of January to go watch hockey in Edmonton. But there were folks that were from other places outside of Edmonton that were Blackhawk fans. Like I feel like you see them kind of everywhere.
Well, for sure, because they're original six teams, so
Yeah.
they're everywhere. But there's also kids that play there, or local kids that played there at one point, so their
Mhm.
families are fans and whatever. Again, that kind of stuff just doesn't happen with the Panthers. You're not going to go somewhere else in the United States and see a Panthers hat. It's just it's just not the way it works. I don't think they probably grew their fan base over the past couple of years, but my belief is that if they started, let's say they didn't make the playoffs for the next 5 years, the rink would be empty.
Mhm.
You're not going to see that in an Edmonton or a Winnipeg or something like that. And for the record, just to make this very clear, if I had a gun to my head, I could not cheer for the Calgary Flames. There is so the people that were like, well, it's Canada's team. No, 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 no. You don't get to come in here and all of a sudden listen, if the Leafs were playing in the Stanley Cup final, I'd probably cheer for the Leafs because I grew up watching the Leafs on Hockey Night in Canada all the time.
Yeah.
I have no issues. Montreal, ooh, that'd be pretty tough. But absolutely not Vancouver or Calgary. There would be absolutely no way I would ever cheer for either one of them. So I get that. Believe me. It's real. It's a real thing. It's like people get violent about it too.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I've only had positive experiences when I've gone up to Canada to watch hockey, be it NHL or at the junior level, but I'm like, oh, it's a whole different animal.
It is. And I will say, I had several people that, I don't want to say several, but there was a handful of people from Florida that thought they were going to sweep. So they all spent thousands of dollars and flew up, and Edmonton trounced them. But one thing some of the people said was they couldn't believe how nice and respectful the Oilers fans were and just how welcoming they were. And I was really happy about that because being down here for game 7, we all met. There's a big mall across the street from the rink, and there
Mhm.
were, when I say probably 2,000 Oilers fans, they were in the restaurants and outside and whatever, and people were chanting. And I mean, I was like, this is something I've never seen in my entire life. They started a parade across the street, marching to the rink with thousands of people going to the game. I've never seen anything like that in my entire life. And, you know, being an Oilers fan, obviously I'm biased, but what that would have done, I mean, the city of Edmonton just came together. And Bill Lindsay, who's a former Panther here, he does the color for the broadcast, and he's one of our really good friends, and he's a guest on our show a lot. And Bill grew up in British Columbia, and he goes, in Edmonton, he goes, I've never heard anything so loud in my entire life as that rink. He's like, it was the loudest thing I've ever heard. He goes, we had our headphones on and we couldn't hear each other over the headphones doing the game. And he goes, and when they won game 4, he goes, I was walking back to my hotel. You think they won the Stanley Cup? He's like, it just means so much to them,
Mhm.
and it's such a different environment here.
I will definitely add the time that I was up in Edmonton, everyone was absolutely lovely. They
Good.
spanked the Blackhawks. I was in a little bit of a sour mood just because I went up to Canada and the Blackhawks didn't score an entire goal the whole week. So I was a little bitter, but everyone was just lovely.
Good.
And I know my dad has a little different of opinion just because he grew up in a different generation. He was used to more of the Gretzky Oiler fan base that was a little bit more aggressive. So I think he went in a little bit more hesitant, thinking that he was going to get, chirped at quite a bit. And I'm like, no, everyone's really nice.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you guys. Isn't it an experience going to an Oiler game there?
It was the thing that blew my mind was like the casino in the Rogers place. I
Yes,
was like,
yeah.
what?
It was built attached to it. But yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that was absolutely fantastic. Freezing, but
Yeah.
fantastic. Um, yes, yeah, no, it was absolutely great. Let me see, what other questions do I have about the Florida Panthers? Because I could talk about the finals all day, every day. Let's see, kind of what for the Florida Panthers per se. I know you said that they really don't need anything more in their game to run it back. Are you kind of just predicting that they're going straight back to the finals?
No.
No?
No, it's funny because Rod and I had this argument on our
Mhm,
podcast and on his show. People always ask me for predictions,
mhm,
and I'm like, no. It's funny because scouts that I talked to last year at the Panthers games really truly felt like the Panthers wouldn't make it past the second round.
mhm.
And I agreed with that. And, when they played Vegas that year in the final, they had no business getting even past the first round, and it was evident against Vegas how much better Vegas was.
Yeah,
And being there in person, you can really see how strong Vegas was. And, but the biggest factor with the Panthers is usually Bobrovsky. He's going to steal at least one game in a playoff series, if not four.
yeah.
He's just that factor that really makes a big difference. And you're probably obviously very familiar with Dale Talon. And
Huge fan, big fan.
yeah, Dale, we had Dale on our podcast, and I see Dale at the rink, not as much this year. He's traveling a lot more this year, but he's just become one of my favorite people because he will call a spade, and he's a completely different human being than he was when he worked. But Dale takes a lot of heat for the Bobrovsky contract here. And people were like, why would you sign him for that long for that much money? And all of a
Because
sudden,
it's Bob.
yeah, and it paid off last year. So
Yeah.
for Dale's sake, and even honestly, Bobrovsky, the year that they lost to Vegas, I think was even better in the playoffs than he was last year. And that's saying something. And I was glad for Dale that Bobrovsky's playing. But Bobrovsky, you can tell when he's locked in. You can see it immediately. But he's that guy that likes to make his own work. He will be flopping all over. He kind of reminds me of Dominic Hasek. He'll be all over the place, just like making, and he's sliding across to make a save. And I'm like, you took yourself out of the play. Like, this is your own fault, right? But he's locked in, and that's the way he plays. He's just, if he's on, that's their biggest gun.
Yeah. Uh, Yeah, no, I completely agree. Also, we're big fans of Dale Talon on this show. It was a little hard when I was a kid. He traded my favorite Blackhawk player when I was a kid, but got over that kind of quickly. He's with the Panthers organization now, so I at least get to see him once a year. But yeah, no, we're big fans of Dale.
Dale is actually working for Vancouver. He's scouting for the Canucks.
Oh no! So Dale traded Tomo Rutu is one of the assistant coaches behind the bench for the
Oh,
Panthers.
that's who
And
you
Dale had traded him. And so 10-year-old me, that was like the first heartbreak in sports for me, was seeing him leave. But now he's with the Panthers, which is why I was cheering for the Panthers so much for the finals, because he is the reason that I watch hockey.
Well, I still fresh in my mind 35 years later what I dealt with Wayne getting sold. But that's a whole another podcast, my friend, and I don't want to talk about that. That scar cuts deep.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Kind of one final. We spoke about Bob a little bit. What is your thoughts? Because there's a little bit of a difference of a goalie tandem this year. You don't have Stolars backing up Bob since he was traded. Um, are you confident with your backup right now, or is it kind of just still 100% Bob's game?
So the backup for the Panthers is Spencer Knight,
Okay.
who he was in and out of different things. And so he entered, I think it was a substance abuse program and whatever. So he missed pretty much an entire year, and he played pretty well in the preseason. But
Mhm.
I still think that when any player, here's a good example, Patrick Kane. When you miss a whole season, regardless of what it happens to be, who knows what's going to happen? Now, Kane was obviously injury related and surgeries, and that makes a big difference too.
Yeah.
But, you
It
know,
still affects you a lot.
sure. And goaltenders are definitely more of a psychological type of player. So the fans here really back Spencer Knight. They really, really like him. Honestly, I was really happy to see Stolarz go to Toronto and get an opportunity to play, and he's playing really well. And I think whoever comes here and is the backup is always going to be Bob's backup. You know, same thing in Tampa. Vasilevsky is going to be your guy, and it's just one of those things that you know you're going to be a backup to Bob. So I think I don't know. Spencer Knight goes back and forth to me. He's not necessarily somebody that I would trust to be a go-to guy. But you never know. We saw Aiden Hill win the Stanley Cup for Vegas. We saw Darcy Kemper, and we saw Skinner almost win it for Edmonton last year.
Right.
Everybody was, oh, they need goaltending. But do they?
Right.
Because it was a 1-goal difference last year in the Stanley Cup. And the 2 years before that were teams that was not their starting goaltenders. Whereas we see, if you look at the Rangers, they have Vezina Trophy winner, but they also have Jonathan Quick, who stands on his head still every time he plays.
Yeah.
So they didn't do anything last year. But again, that's a time for another topic. I could go off about that girl all day.
Well, and I feel like perhaps while Spencer is still getting their footing, being the backup to a pretty consistent goaltender may actually be the best spot than to a team where you're kind of expected to be 50-50 with another goaltender.
I think so, because you're the backup. He's not trying to win a spot.
Yeah.
When we see other teams that, like Edmonton last year, when they had Jack Campbell, and they're like, what are we going to do with all of these goaltenders? And it was like guys were splitting time 50-50. I'm like, you got to figure this out. You can't get into the second half of the season and not have your go-to goaltender. Your goaltender needs to know he is starting every game or whatever, right? It's just, again, it's a psychological thing. So they need to know. But I think with Spencer Knight, I think you're right. It's an opportunity for him to get his head back in the game, get some reps, get some pucks. And I think he'll be all right. Every time he plays, he does well. But I will say that I think the Panthers got a rude awakening when New Jersey was here last week. They lost both games against New Jersey, Tuesday and Thursday. And I don't think that they realize the Panthers, they'll win a bunch. And then if they lose a couple, it's catastrophic. And then they win a bunch and they lose a couple. But I think that was very eye-opening for them to lose to New Jersey. And I think Spencer Knight started Tuesday and maybe Bob on Thursday. So either way, it was, I think, kind of got way off topic there, didn't I? But
that's
I
what
think
the show is for.
that's why we do podcasts, so we can talk about stuff like that. But yeah, so it'll be good for Spencer Knight to get some reps. But again, there's no threat because Bob's the guy.
Right. And not, like you said, he's not trying to fight a spot. There's no ego in the sense of like, I need to beat the other guy. The main guy is a Stanley Cup person that just stands on their head and is absolutely insane in front of the net. Like, it's not a bad guy to back up.
Mm-hmm.
All right, perfect. Sarina, that is all that I have. Thank you so much for coming on. Do you want to kind of tell our listeners how we can find you guys?
For sure. So we have the Cats and Bolts podcast. We like to talk about, I guess, Florida hockey between the Panthers, the Lightning, whatever it happens to be. Our Spotify name, I guess, or YouTube is just Cats and Bolts. You'll find us on, again, Spotify, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. We're everywhere. So you guys can check that out. We do 1 episode a week, and sometimes it gets spicy. So if you guys want to check it out, do it.
Heck yeah. All right, perfect. Like I said, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
My pleasure.
And we got a couple of more teams for our Monday preview. Next up is the Anaheim Ducks. We play them on Tuesday this week. We've already played them this season, so I'm not going to re-explain the stuff that we talked about last time we played the Anaheim Ducks, but we do have a couple of updates. We've got Robbie Fabry out for 6 to 8 weeks with a knee injury. Cam Fowler is out for 2 to 4 weeks with an upper body injury. So they have decided to recall Drew Hellison and Jansen Harkings from the San Diego Gulls. That is the Anaheim Ducks AHL affiliate. And then same goalie tandem as we discussed previously. They do play Dallas the night before they play Chicago, so it is a back-to-back. It's back-to-back at home for the Ducks, so unsure if they're going to give the same goaltender the net both nights. I think it would definitely depend on whoever's in net for the Dallas game and the performance that comes out of that. They are 2-4 out of their last 6. Their last game, they did manage to beat the Detroit Red Wings 6-4, and currently they are sitting at 7th out of 8 teams in the Pacific. Next team, we haven't played yet, so very exciting. We've got the Philadelphia Flyers. We do have a little bit of an injury report for right now, but they are expected to be in the lineup come Saturday when we play them. So we've got Jamie Drysdale and Samuel Ersson out, but like I said, they're projected to be back later in the week. So I would imagine by Saturday, they're back in the lineup, which is great because Jamie Drysdale is, probably what was one of my favorite Ducks, but is probably not my favorite Flyer. For the goalie tandem, we've got Fedotov and Kolosov. I apologize so much if I'm botching that. I probably am. A couple of notable players. We've got Owen Tippett, Travis Konecny, Matvey Michkov. For defensemen, you've got Travis Sanheim. And like I said, Jamie Drysdale is definitely one of my favorites. And the name to be on the lookout for. Philly does have a couple of newbies, like I said. Matvey Michkov was a part of Connor Bedard's draft class. And then we've got Jet Luchenko, who was drafted this past year, that has made the NHL roster. Very exciting for both of them. I know he's had a little bit of a slower start, but all to be expected with your first year in the NHL. But it seems like he is starting to find his groove up here on the professional level. As we've talked about a couple of times, bits and pieces more towards during the playoffs when we start talking about the Eastern Conference more, their head coach is John Tortorella, who is a personality in itself. They do have 2 days off before they play the Chicago Blackhawks, so it'll be interesting to see in terms of goalie tandem. It seems like Fedotov has gotten that number 1 goalie spot for the Philadelphia Flyers, so do they put him in for both games? We shall see. They are 3 for 3 right now, split in terms of wins and losses in their last 6 games. I'm recording this prior to the Buffalo Sabres matchup on Saturday night tonight. So that stat is going to look different either way, either it be 3-4 or 4-3 by the end of the night. Big thing with Philly, they've got pieces, they've got some odds and ends. Not a true sense of identity. I think that's going to come in the next couple of years, whether they sort of like build around that Michkov is their identity or another younger player and kind of follow in suit from there. We don't know yet, but they've got a bunch of different pieces across the boards, but in general, they just lack depth. And with the Eastern Conference being so competitive, they can compete, but they're nowhere near competitive as other guys that are in their conference. And that is this week's Monday preview. We've got Anaheim, we've got Florida, and we've got Philly.